You're listening to the Casting Shadows podcast, which is, of course, linked to the Casting Shadows blog and, less obviously, to the Casting Shadows YouTube channel, known affectionately and more successfully searched for as Runeslinger. So all of those things are where I express my thoughts and try to interact with other people with thoughts about role-playing games. And if that sounds interesting to you, then, well, you might be in the right place, but only time and listening will tell. I think it's fair to say that the Casting Shadows podcast is regularly intermittent. And so it has been just shy of 2 months since the last recording, which was, of course, not my intention, but as we gamers of a certain age are often experiencing, sometimes life makes simple things challenging. So what have I been doing in the 2 months, or almost 2 months, since the last recording? Well, if you heard the last recording, you might know the answer to some of the things that I've been doing. But in this episode, we will talk about those things. The Round Table Roulette episode from Third Floor Wars, talk about that a little bit. We'll talk more about the Alien campaign and what's happening with it. And we'll talk about two topics which are near and dear to my heart. One, which has recently surfaced again on the Nerds RPG Variety Cast podcast, hosted by Jason Connerly. That's the topic of immersion. And I'm going to talk about immersion as a topic rather than talking about immersion as what it means to me. And the other topic is RPG a day. Seem too early? Well, it's not. I mentioned in the previous episode that I was looking forward to an opportunity, which at that time was just around the corner, of participating in the Round Table Roulette series from Third Floor Wars. Hosted by Craig Shipman, the host and mastermind behind Third Floor Wars, Round Table Roulette features 3 people, Craig and 2 others. And as the name suggests, we go around the table in one direction asking questions, and then we come back around in the other direction asking questions and follow-up questions on role-playing game-related topics. And each one, with its different mix of personalities, goes off into different areas. Not exactly a tangent. Everything's very specifically focused on role-playing games and activities surrounding their design or their implementation or how they're played. In the episode that I appeared in, the other guest, there's Craig as the host and myself, and there was Seth Skorkowski of great internet and literary fame. And it was a lot of fun. It was very interesting, having no idea what the questions might be or where the tangents might go, what the follow-up questions might be, or what the situation of broadcasting live might cause you to recognize that you were saying in the moment, like what you were remembering to say and what you were perhaps forgetting to say or wish that you had said later on. So that's an interesting experience always, that very live feeling. This was a blast. And what I didn't really expect was how quickly we settled into like an easy and enjoyable camaraderie. Living over here, I don't randomly bump into gamers that often. And not being overly into sports, or at least the kind of sports that I'm into, most other people aren't. So I don't often find myself in a social situation where I have a lot to talk about with strangers, right? Other than, where we live or food options or things like that, so nothing terribly interesting, but this was interesting right out of the gate. So before the session started and after the session started, we were, swapping game stories and game recommendations and just enjoying each other's company, and it was a blast. And I think that transfers through into the video. So if you haven't seen it, they are done for YouTube. It's not an audio format. So you can see Seth Skorkowski and myself and Craig Shipman talking about games with a specific focus on game mastering. So I had a lot of fun. They threw me some curveball questions. I hope that mine were as interesting and satisfying for Craig and Seth as theirs were for me. And, let me know what you think. Okay. The next topic. Oh, it's a little scarier. One of the major topics of this season of the podcast has been our exploration of running Alien, the role-playing game from Free League, as a campaign, and the way that we have been working through balancing out differing desires for horror and action to suit the players in the game. So we have some players who really get into mechanisms of play which relate to the psychological condition of the character, and we have other players who really don't like that at all. We have some players who really enjoy playing through combats, especially highly detailed or tactical combats, and we have others who are less interested in that. So there's a specific mix, and Alien delivers a very specific punch of experience. So how do we balance that out? That has been one of the major topics or major themes for this season of the podcast. For the last 3 months, we haven't been able to get together to play. We've tried, but at the last minute, I've had to cancel, or people have, gone away with different responsibilities. So there are some breaks in play that we knew, weeks in advance were going to be lost days, and then we had other experiences just hours short of playing that led to disappointment. But last week, we managed to get together to play, and tomorrow morning, my time, we'll be playing again. So this has brought us into what we're calling Mission 6. So we're running a mission-based format because it's Colonial Marines, and each mission has been intended, if possible, to be rather short and encompass just 2 sessions of play, so an A part and a B part. Some of them have gone a little longer, and sometimes we play through downtime between sessions, and sometimes we simply talk about downtime. These are different options presented in the game, and they have different mechanisms associated with them. So the previous session, or 2 sessions ago, was a downtime session. That was episode 6A, and it has some far-reaching consequences, but we haven't played for 3 months. So those consequences have been sitting with us for a while. So I've been really quite anxious to get back to it, and trying to find a time where we can all get together and play. And it turned out that when we played the very next session, that one of the players, Craig Shipman from Third Floor Wars, was unable to attend. So this created a situation where, what do we do? One of those classic role-playing situations. Do we not play? Do we play and pilot the character as an NPC? Do we find a way to remove the character from the scene and that sort of stuff? But fortunately, this question was easy to answer because of the events of the beginning of Mission 6, the downtime section. We'll talk about that a little later. But so it feels good to get back into play, but it also feels like the campaign is coming to a natural conclusion. And it's quite different from what we expected. And so I think it's worth talking a little bit about in this episode of the podcast. So what do I mean? Originally, when we looked at the system, just looking at the system and hearing people talk about other iterations of the Year Zero system, which supports the game, it became quite obvious that the game was intended to be lethal and that this was a very good match for the subject matter, where we want an alien game to have lethality of violence, right? And different types of challenges like that. We want space to be a hostile place. So we have discovered in play that the system is very lethal, but in our particular campaign, the dice have been somewhat kind. The players are well used to playing with each other. They're doing a good job playing their characters, but also playing the functional roles of colonial marines that they have taken on. And so what this means is that the characters, despite what seems like all the odds, the characters have survived. They've survived through a lot of sessions. They have survived through a lot of real-world time. Of course, a lot more real-world time has passed than in-game time. But they've been through a lot, and the players have developed a certain kind of attachment to the characters, to the point where it feels like these characters, who initially we saw as our first picks among several that were generated for a troupe of characters, have now become the protagonists. Right? And so if they are lost to the lethality of this system, it will definitely feel like the campaign is over. That if we were to continue with new characters, it would feel like starting a new campaign, or feel like a reboot or something like that. So because the characters are getting into more and more difficult situations as a result of what has happened in play, it's starting to feel more and more likely that at some point either they will overcome these challenges, find a way to escape permanently from these challenges, or they will be taken down by these challenges. Either of these situations will end the campaign, and that will be a natural and I think satisfying conclusion, regardless of which kind of major type of conclusion we find. And it feels like it's close. So this has sparked conversation about the system. You know, we like it, we enjoy the characters, we like aspects of it. Is this a game that will hold long-term enjoyment for us? Like, it's quite successful, despite reports you might hear on the internet that it is a system that's better suited for the short-term cinematic mode that, you know, YouTube is full of examples of. A lot of people are running the printed adventures, and these are using the cinematic rules for Alien, which are different from the campaign rules for Alien. We haven't seen quite as many groups tackle the Colonial Marines campaign, which came out in the Colonial Marines sourcebook not too long ago. But playing the game long-term on a mechanical level, on a system level, is quite satisfying and easy. But for our group at this time, is this where we want to devote our attention? Do we want to play another game of Alien? Do we want to get into a round-robin game of Alien? Do we want to try another Year Zero game like Twilight 2000 or, you know, Forgotten Realms, or not Forgotten Realms, but Forbidden Lands or the like? Is this something that we want to do? And definitely we are divided on this issue. But I think most of us are experiencing a hankering for playing something else. We've got other ideas. We've been playing for quite a while now, and we have some creative people in the group. We've got a whole host of game masters who are constantly being exposed to inspirational material and getting ideas of doing X with Y, or running this new game, or running this old game, or introducing these people in the group who haven't played that game. And so one of the things we're talking about a lot is Pendragon. We always end up talking about using Ubiquity, which is from like Hollow Earth Expedition and All for One and Desolation and Leagues of Adventure and those games, Space 1889. And we're just there's always an opportunity to use Mithras, etc., etc. We've got a lot of ideas for a lot of play. Do we want to dive back into Alien right away? Probably not. But I'm really glad that we played it. I'm really looking forward to playing it again. I'm really hoping that one or more members of the group will run it at some point, like we play something else as a palate cleanser and then jump back into Alien with me as a player this time. I think that would be a lot of fun. So I've got really nothing negative to say about Alien, the role-playing game. It's been really satisfying. I would like to play it with a group of people who are more interested in horror than action. Like I might like to play it on a space trucking footing or on a colonist footing, and have the environment stay the same for each session of play, or for most sessions of play, but have the threats change, which would be kind of the opposite experience that we've had so far in the campaign, where the the setting really is the Marine squad, and the environment is one of the threats that's thrown against them. So that's been a different kind of perspective. And one of the fun reasons to play science fiction is just how much things can change. Okay, so I think that's enough of a report about Alien right now. Currently, we have a full playlist for Alien Actual Play. It has all of the actual play sessions, which after tomorrow morning's session, we'll have 3 episodes for Mission 6. And so that we go all the way from our session 0 through A and B, or sometimes C and sometimes a D, I think, sessions for missions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Mission 6 is underway. There's a lot of actual play. The sessions run from 90 minutes to 2 hours. I think there's one or more 1-hour sessions in there as well. So they're pretty quick. They're not edited for time, but they are edited for information. There are rules updates on the screen. There are clarifications of things that the players might know that a viewer who hasn't played the game might not, and that sort of stuff. There are visual cues on the screen to help you out there. Also, that playlist contains a quick guide to the rules and some unboxings and theories about the system and stuff like that. So if that sounds interesting, you can find that on the YouTube channel, and the link will be in the show notes. The next topic is, as you may know, pretty close to my heart, and that's RPG a Day, specifically RPG a Day for 2022. You might be thinking, wow, it's kind of early to be talking about RPG a Day, but behind the scenes, we are in the stage where it's necessary to be finalizing some ideas. It's necessary to be contacting artists and doing polls about, are you interested in doing it again this year? That kind of stuff. So in order to have the questions ready for everybody for August, and particularly to have them available through July, so people most of the people I think who listen to this podcast are podcasters as well. So in order to have those questions available so that you can be prepared, if you don't want to do it every day live, but would rather like to have a little buffer time, we need to get the questions ready sometime during this month so that they're available next month. Okay. Now, each year that I've been involved, we've had the talk. I think of it as the talk, and that's, will we do it again? Now, this will be the 9th year. That's kind of cool to think about. It won't be my 9th year, but it'll be the 9th year of RPG a Day. So every year, David and I talk about it. Do we want to do it again? Do we want to do it the same way? Do we want to do it differently? If so, how differently? And that sort of stuff. And therein lies the rub, as I think anyone who participates publicly or at least slightly publicly online can attest, that can sometimes be a challenge, right? We ask from the people who participate in RPG a Day, we ask that they are positive. I think it's a simple ask, right? If you're going to participate, do so in a positive way. Think charitably about the question or prompt. Think charitably about your fellow gamers. Think charitably about gaming in general, and talk about it in a way that other people could find interesting, that might serve as a lure for newcomers. It might be revelatory or explanatory for someone who's got questions. Just share the stuff that you love about the hobby for RPG a Day. Don't share the stuff that you don't like. Don't use it as a platform to critique or attack others. Don't use it as a 31-day opportunity to rant about how you don't like this or that or the other thing. And particularly, please don't use it as a platform to pick on David and myself for decisions that we made, in designing the contest. We're open to discussions about design, redesign, or we're open to questions about what did you mean by this and all of this stuff. But being ambushed by strangers online on a daily section through the entire month can get a little draining, and it can often, go to bizarre lengths, right, of how upset people can get, to the point of mentioning 31 times how they wish it had been a prompt, not a question, while someone else is mentioning 31 times that they wish it was a question, not a prompt. And, that sort of stuff. We have, in large numbers, people who want to complain that they don't play enough games to answer the questions, and we have people who want to complain that not enough games are represented by the questions. And that can sting if you have put in some effort to making the questions as open as possible, and with the faith and hope and charity and optimism that people will, try to read those prompts or read those questions charitably and, use their creativity and use their own interest to launch themselves into some kind of answer for that prompt. Now, it's not easy to get through all 31 days of RPG a day. And I myself have had my own bleak times, and the evidence are available on the YouTube channel. There's one year where I run smack dab into the same problems as everybody else. So I feel it from both sides. But so every year we have the discussion, will we? So we've already done a quick poll on the RPG a day Facebook page. And if you don't know about the RPG a day Facebook page, it's easy to find. It's, Facebook/RPG a day. And we did a quick poll there, and there seems to be some interest among the people who, actually get notifications from that page. So it's likely that we're going to go forward. And I'm in the final stages now of doing some drafts about some ideas I have for RPG a day. We've done prompts for a number of years, and while this has been much more successful in helping the event itself to spread to more countries, because it's easier to translate in context, and because it's the broadest possible category of prompt type for the broadest category of gamer who might be interested in participating to interact with the prompt. But we're feeling like it's time to return to questions. So this is going to, we understand, we recognize, is going to disappoint the people who respond better to prompts, such as artists or sketch makers or this sort of thing. And, but it's going to please those people for whom a simple and clear question or prompt, text-based prompt, is more effective in prompting their creativity. So, the things have swung around in the ninth year to where we're looking at that. I'm going to keep it a little close to the vest about how exactly I'm prepared to make some pitches to David about how we could do it to make it different and interesting and engaging in its own right, and avoid the recycled question problem, which again is another example of things that people complain about. Why didn't you ask this question again? I love answering that question, and then met with, why did you ask this question again? I answered it last year. So we can't please all of the people all the time. And we need to find a balance for ourselves on what's an acceptable amount of flack we're willing to invite with the changes that we make and the changes that we decide not to make. So RPG a day does look like it's going to happen again. It's in the planning stages. I am quite excited about the ideas that I have for it this year and the questions that are shaping up to make sense in the context of that format. But I'm not going to tell you about the format just yet. But if you have any questions or comments about RPG a day, if you have anything to say about it at all, please feel free to call in. I will share your comments, and we can go from there. But anyway, the internet has a dual nature as a force for positivity and negativity. And, sometimes the negativity can seem very frustrating, daunting, and disappointing, and puts us in a position to say, this is a lot of fun, but do we really want to expose ourselves to it again? So things to think about in the coming weeks as we get ready for August and RPG a Day 2022. The next of the two main topics that I wanted to talk about today, well, that's immersion. And immersion is one of those words that people will argue about, and immersion is one of those, let's call them conditions or situations of play, one of those responses to play, which some people swear by and some people will swear doesn't exist. And others will step in and say, yeah, well, it might exist. It's not really worth thinking about because it's such an ephemeral condition. And what all of this suggests to me is that we recognize the term when we hear it without really having ever bothered to define it. And while there has been a lot of digital ink spilled on the topic of immersion, there are people who will spend most of their time arguing about the word choice, even though we can recognize it's fairly effective as we generally have an idea about why the person would use that descriptor. And if we check out things like John Peterson's book, The Elusive Shift, we can see how early it became a term that people wanted to use, right? And one of the primary themes of The Elusive Shift is how gamer conversation, for one reason or another, has never really progressed beyond this point. I don't think that was an intentional theme on the part of the author, but it is one that he communicated really well. We are still having the same conversations in the same way, and each new wave of gamers that come into the hobby are having the same revelations that we did, and we had the same revelations that our predecessors did, because we're being exposed to the same kind of experiences, and we're fumbling toward the same kind of vocabulary. And while there are some among us who want to lay claim to the vocabulary, like, I invented the term, this, that, or the other thing, it's highly unlikely to be true. They may have been among the first to use it, but clearly as a large-scale group, gamers are not talking directly to each other in any meaningful way. And we're overhearing snippets of each other's conversations, maybe, and borrowing words that we think we know what we mean and using them in our conversation, where the people that we are now talking to think we know what we mean. And, some of these words are successful and some of these words aren't. Some of them spark more arguments than others. So I think immersion is quite successful as a word. A similar word that is proposed is engagement, right? And you'll find people on the internet and out in the real world, I guess, who would look at these two words as being two sides of the same coin, or being the exact same thing, or as being step one and step two. First there's engagement, then there can be immersion, there may be immersion, and that sort of thing. So one of the things that I'd like to contribute to this conversation, because this is a conversation I've been involved with for a very long time, and I would like to contribute the fear that we lose a term like immersion. And I've had it suggested to me several times that immersion is a stupid word because it means, being underwater, as what it actually means. But that's kind of a losing argument with a living language like English. So we use immersion for a variety of contexts, including role-playing games. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions just to serve as a framing device for your own thoughts about immersion, and so we can talk about it. We can talk about talking about it so that maybe we can have a chance to further the conversation. Right? So we can see video game advertisements suggest that the gameplay is immersive. Well, what do they mean by that? Like, think about your own play of video games. If you play video games, what do those games that cite themselves as being immersive, what do they mean by immersive? Don't try to define it. Don't try to defend your definition. Just start thinking about it when the ad copywriter chose the word immersive for the gameplay, what was meant, right? What elements of the gameplay suggested immersion to that writer, to that player of the game? Similarly, home theater ads, right? Immersive sound and picture. But we can also see it on advertisements for books, right? And I'm using advertisements specifically because they're describing the media that is causing the reaction in us, right? The media of the video game. It's immersive. Okay, what do you mean by that? How does it immerse? Or what is that feeling of immersion caused by or supported by or facilitated by that media? What about home theater? What about a book is immersive, right? In what am I immersive? What is that experience like? Then after you thought about that a little bit, and you might not have any distinct or real responses, and that's totally all right. But asking the questions, I think, is helpful. Then we can start thinking about what do we think others mean by the term immersive for whatever they're talking about, RPGs or not RPGs, right? What can be meant by the term immersion, right? Push ourselves to think from other people's perspective, right? What can be meant by the term immersion? What can be meant by the idea of engagement? How similar are these things? How connected are these things? Why would I choose one of those words over the other, right? Just ask the questions, start the process. How, if at all, does immersion relate to engagement? I think some interesting thoughts can surface there. Maybe not clear thoughts. I couldn't stand up and say, oh, I've got completely clear, solid, concrete answers to any of these questions. But when I put myself in the position to ask these questions of myself, I feel better about what I want to say about immersion as it relates to my own experience, right? I can't speak to your experience, but I really want to hear you speak about your experience with immersion, because it seems very clear to me that we have the capacity to be interested in different things. There are those among us that we play with that are more interested in system and using and playing with the system than they are with other things that are involved. They care less about their character than using the mechanisms of play to facilitate their character doing something. They're more interested in the actions, and they reach the actions through the system. So that's the thing that they're interested in. I'm not talking about immersion here or engagement, really. I'm just talking about their interest. When they think about playing, they think about using the mechanisms of play. They think about using the dice as their first and primary point of interest. Of course, they will have others, right, that may be as strong, but there are those among us who focus on system, and there are those among us who focus on character and being able to interact in character, and those who really care about the story, and those who care for those three things not at all. They just care about being together in a group and just enjoying the enjoyment, or they enjoy some other social function on the social level. They are there as the jester, right? They are outside the rules, and they are, picking on the other players and keeping them from getting too serious about themselves and stuff like that. Or, you fill in the blank. These are your friends. You should know them, right? So by this point, when we start thinking about what can immersion mean and in what are we immersing, and is immersion a constant? When I realize that I have been immersed, have I always been immersed in the same thing and in the same way and for the same length of time and for the same reasons? And was I brought out of that condition of immersion by something in particular, all right? And if there are things that always impact our ability to have that experience, that immersive experience, regardless of what we immerse in or how deeply we feel we have immersed, whatever that might mean to us individually, right? If there is something which always impacts negatively or positively on that experience, is there something we can do to remove it if negative or enhance it if positive? And I think that is a useful discussion for a group to have. And I think talking about what we have discovered makes it easier to find other people out there who respond similarly. We already do this with types of games, right? We already have heavy versus light mechanics as descriptors, right? Identifying how the system works and what we're interested in. So it's easier for people who like more complicated, crunchier systems to band together and talk about systems that they enjoy. And we already have role-playing games versus, I shudder to use the term, story games, and so on and so forth. We have all of these different labels and descriptors that some of us might like and some of us might not like, but they help us find people with similar interests. So I haven't noticed that particular conversation has been very successful or very widespread about immersion. How much thought has anyone who's listening to this particular episode given to the quality of their immersive experience, the frequency of their immersive experience, potential triggers for the immersive experience, potential barriers to an immersive experience, right? And if you have given thought to it and you can articulate it, well, why don't we start a discussion about it, and we can find areas of commonality, and maybe that conversation might suggest a better term to us, or it might make us want to double down on the use of the word immersion and find a way to add meaning to it, add a new entry in the dictionary for what it means to us that maybe could persist and be shared and be useful out there for other people, or maybe it will just languish with us but still be useful for us. And well, that's a step in the right direction, I think. As a tangent, as a related topic, one of the things that I've been doing in the last 2 months is conducting something which has got the awkward name of the GM Coaching Workshop series. Right? I was asked by Craig Shipman of the Third Floor Wars podcast to watch one of his live plays at some point and give him some feedback. And that turned into a fairly lengthy series. It's not quite complete yet, as I've been going through each of the episodes that come out for him running a one-to-one Call of Cthulhu adventure called Mask of Desire, which comes from the collection of short adventures called Does Love Forgive from Chaosium. And in that, the first video in the series takes a look at a section of live play. It doesn't answer any questions. It simply poses questions, just like I've done here, right? There's no judgment here. There's no expectation that you're going to find the answer that I found and that I think my answer is the right answer. That's not what this is about. This is simply about, asking, have you asked these questions? What questions do you ask yourselves? What kind of responses do you get when you start thinking along the lines of questioning the nature of that experience, right? So in the GM Coaching Workshop series, we're talking not about an immersive experience per se, but some of the questions raised are specifically about what effect does it have when description in play is done this way? Is there another way to handle description? Is there another way to handle informing the player about a character reaction, such as after a sanity roll or after a successful skill check or a failed skill check? Are there different ways, right? Not are there better ways. Are there different ways to inform the player of something, to have that conversation or communication with the player about information? Are there different ways to do it? And if so, what are the advantages and disadvantages of those ways, right? What are the actual effects of doing what you're doing now differently? And are there situations where you might want to try it this other way? So I think the conversation on Nerds RPG Variety Cast is going exactly in this direction, although I can hear some frustration about about terms and how we don't all think about immersion the same way, right? We don't think about a variety of things in gaming the same way. And I think most of us, certainly most of us who bother to do podcasts, recognize that it really is okay. In fact, it's kind of interesting that we do things in different ways. It's to our advantage, right? There will be more development, more exciting gameplay. But at the same time, if we don't think charitably, if we don't try to connect with each other and communicate about what it actually means to me to be immersed or to be engaged or to prefer system or to interact with character or to interact on a story level or interact on the player level, if we aren't willing to find how to describe how play affects us, then we are in effect choosing to limit our capacity to find good playing partners and good combinations of partners and games. And we're missing out on opportunities to maximize our experience, maximize our opportunities in the systems that we enjoy, and answer some questions about why we just can't seem to enjoy playing game X with group Y. As much as we love those people, it's just not as much fun. Well, why is that? Or why is the tool use, such as Jason's excellent example of the impact of the VTT on his sense of immersion, right, in specific conditions? Why does that matter in this particular game, but is easily overlooked in some other game? The answers lie in some of these. I think the answers lie in some of this form of self-reflection, but not so much in isolation, but exactly as this, Anchor podcast community can provide, the action and interaction with other gamers about what it means to them. So this is my contribution, my small contribution, and that's to ask some questions about immersion and what it means to you. You've been listening to another episode of the Casting Shadows podcast from Season 3. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to read more or hear more of our thoughts on gaming, you can check castingshadowsblog.com or you can check youtube.com/runeslinger, and you can find more, and hopefully it will be to your liking. And if it is, let's talk about it. And if it isn't, well, let's talk about that too. Anyway, until the next time, take care.